Hello, everybody. Welcome to Game Audio Hour number 65. This is our weekly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas, the latest techniques, project experiences to audio secrets. Here's where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. Vince, you're in a new office.
I am. I'm in a new office. I'm avoiding all the construction work that's happening with one of the new tenants in this building. So here I am. It's not a horrible space. I've got it, threw up some of these panels, did some room correction software. It's sounding mostly okay right now. Hopefully I'm sounding okay to you guys.
You sound fantastic. What correction software are you using? I meant to ask that in the green room.
I think I mentioned this before in an earlier episode, but it's IK Multimedia's Arc 2 software, which is really good. It's software. It comes with a microphone. Put your microphone in a bunch of different places. Do some tests. Does some correction on it, and it levels out those peaks and valleys in my room response. It's pretty good. I like it a lot.
Does it run in the front end of everything? Like if you were just to pop up iTunes and listen to something, would it be? Does iTunes run through that software?
It doesn't. However, I've got it set up where everything in my computer actually runs through Reaper. And Reaper is this big old audio patch bay for everything. So Audio applications and non-Audio applications. And it will also host VSTs for me. So one of the things is that Arc 2 VST. So everything from any application that's running on my Windows machine is room corrected.
Oh, that's cool, man. That's a smart way to use a DAW, which we're allowed to talk about now.
Yes. He's not in the room. Excellent.
He gave us permission anyway.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Cool.
Speaking of which, Alex, speaking of DAWs, how is your DAW?
Well, we'll get into that in just a moment, but I am fine. Thank you for asking. Let's see. Well, I had it was a bit of a rough weekend this weekend. Anybody out there who doesn't have children, because then you'll get to experience wonderful things like your son spontaneously throwing up all over 2 beds in the middle of the night on a Saturday. Ooh. Yeah. So fortunately, one good thing about being in Japan is that we have futons and we sleep on the floor, which means that when your son spontaneously throws up on 2 futons and they get written off because you just can't get rid of that smell, the easy thing to do is just chuck them out and get some new ones. So we have some new futons arriving today, and that's a delightful way to start a broadcast, isn't it? I'm sure you're all really eager to hear more about that smell.
Did you record it? That's what's important. Are you going to use it in a game for sound design? You say, hold on, son, do it again.
There's nothing more delightful than the sound of somebody throwing up.
But the throw-up sounds are always fake. It's the real ones that really just get you. That sound really hits you in the gut. And when you see a sound design library that has throw-up, they never quite really affect you the way a true throw-up would.
Yeah. I think it's the fact that it might be the same with punch sounds. When you're in movies, punch sounds sound like distorted bass drums or snare drums or stuff like that. Whereas a real punch sound it's really disturbing. Like if you've ever had the displeasure of catching a street fight or something, they're really No,
I don't.
It's a good thing that they don't. What?
I don't fight like you do. I don't get these street brawls.
Right. I mean, they just look at you and they just run away, don't they? I mean,
no. I do. I run away.
That's the approach.
Yeah.
Nobody takes Vince on, as I know, because Vince came to visit me in Osaka, and we were walking around the back streets of downtown South Osaka, where it can get a bit rough and ready, and people were just parting waves in front of Moses there, as Vince was coming through, commanding a presence, the man of the iwi.
My American presence, maybe. You don't want to get in a street fight with an American. Who knows what he's got on his person?
Diamante in Japanese, little known fact, Diamante in Japanese means that everyone will die.
Right.
This is a fact in some countries, not necessarily Japan.
So let's move on to game audio, shall we?
Yes.
Yeah, what's that smell? That's the smell of a dead-end conversation trail.
Yeah, I like it. I thought it was funny.
So I'm just going to put in a quick announcement here for those who are interested. A few months ago, I mentioned the upcoming release of a certain plugin from a certain DAW maker that I happen to endorse very strongly, that is Renoise. They have released a VST and an AU format of basically the guts of Renoise. And you should all go to renoise.com/redux. It's called REDUX, Redux. There's a trailer sort of teaser video there that shows you basically the salient features of what it does. Essentially, for those people who are interested, it's a plugin sampler, pretty much like if you've ever used Geist, like sort of very, very super heavily featured drum machine style sampling plugin. However, the difference with this is that within there, unlike Geist, which is basically gives you sort of a drum machine style sequencer, Redux gives you is basically phrases that are based on tracker listings, just like using Renoise the tracker. Yeah. And it's let's see, what is there to say about it? It gives you the basic benefits of what a tracker can give you, which means per note control over effects, over super granular control over your sequences. It can be used as a live performance synth. Basically, you can create these tracker phrases linked to certain samples in the set that you've loaded, and then trigger them with key presses on a controller. It can be just a basic sampler. It has multi-out capabilities, so you can set it up to do the mixing in the DAW if you want. There's a whole slew of the native effects from Renoise. What else is there? The actual sample editor in Renoise, at Vitae Backroom actually, I don't use a dedicated sample editor like Audition or any of those, because I do it all in Renoise actually. Renoise Destructive Sample Editor is really, really fast and got sort of, it's not super heavily featured, but it's got the basic features that operate very quickly and very efficiently. So sample editor, you can record samples in the plugin itself and then use that as new sample sources, loops, trigger points, slicing, stretching, all of this within a very attractive looking resizable interface. So that's Renoise Redux. There are a few, to be honest with you, I've downloaded it, and I'm probably the person who needs it least because I use Renoise, so I can actually have tracker listings inside tracker listings inside tracker listings now, which is completely superfluous. But I've downloaded it, and I have to say there are a few little kinks that need to be ironed out. The actual plugin itself works super solid. I've said it before that actually in the 8 or 9 years that I've been using Renoise, it has never ever crashed or kind of spluttered once, despite all of the crazy stuff I've put it through. This plugin, I imagine, is the same in performance. However, there are a few sort of feature things that are yet to be added. One sort of important thing for Logic users out there is that apparently the way that Logic handles multiple outputs from a plugin, from an AU plugin, differs from other hosts. If you are using Live or Reaper or Cubase on the Mac with the AU, you'll have no problem. However, if you're using Logic and you want to load the Redux AU, you can't yet have access to multiple outs. So it'll only just be a two-pair stereo out. However, that is a feature that's coming pretty soon, according to the forums. I kind of get the sense that the problem with the Renoise developers is they're very stealthy. They'd rather sort of sit there and make solid software than deal with people on forums and have press releases and videos all the time. So whenever something comes out, or when there's a whisper of something comes out, the community goes nuts. And I think they were sort of pressured to release it a little bit earlier. They had the basic stable functionality in there, but there are a few features that are yet to be added on, and one of those is multiple outs for Logic. So if you're a Logic user, then that's just something to bear in mind. That's pretty much it. So, why should you get Redux? Because at its basic level, it's an extremely fast, efficient sampler.
Nice.
It's really, really fast. Like the workflow, here's your sample list, just drag them across there, press the drum kit button to lay them all out on keys, and then you're done. You're ready to go. You want to add some effects to this, you can do that. That's only scratching the surface. You can create key zones and do sort of round-robin kind of programming and all kinds of also envelopes and all the effects and stuff for the different things that you've got loaded in there. I guess the last reason to consider it is that if you have never used a tracker-style interface before, Redux is a great introduction because you can experiment it all in the comfort of a DAW that you're used to using. And it'll just sort of open up possibilities beyond what a drum machine style sampler can give you. They're planning a whole bunch of video tutorials, and there's a very easy to read quick start guide, which is just, I like it when quick start guides don't assume that you're an idiot. You know, they know that you're buying this product because you have a certain level of experience already. So it's very, it reads very easily for people who are, have a little bit of experience with DAWs and how plugins and samples work.
So I see that it's $65 US and Renoise is $75 US, and I'm going to just ask questions and act like I'm dumb, which isn't going to be hard for me to do. Would you ever want Renoise and Redux together? And since the price is so close, would it just, if you got Renoise, do you get the Redux functionality? I kind of doubt that because of what you said earlier, but I'm just double checking.
Okay, so the first question is it worth having both?
Yeah.
It depends how you, I would say it depends how you, it's difficult to say if you're using a tracker program for the first time. I would say
you could rewire Renoise into Ableton or something like that, right? And get the same functionality that Redux is giving you?
Exactly. However, Redux will be a little bit, I guess, easier to use in that you'll just be using it as a plugin inside your regular DAW that you're used to using. You don't need to learn a whole new program.
Would it be smart to say that Redux is kind of like Renoise Lite in a VST format?
Not really, no. So your second question there was, does Redux have all the capabilities of Renoise?
Or another reverse of that. Does Renoise have all the capabilities of Redux?
The answer to that question is yes, it does.
Okay.
So what you are getting by purchasing Renoise is basically all you're really getting is the pattern sequencer, like a super solid DAW sequencer. You're getting the ability to render audio straight from within the program, which of course Redux doesn't do because it's a plugin, so you need to render it in your DAW. Although you can record things to new samples, but that's a little bit different. Other than that, you get scopes, you get a lot of analysis, you get the phase scope, and you get a spectral analysis. You get, well, that's pretty much it, I think. When it comes down to it, yeah, Redux is basically Renoise in the VST format. Oh, one very, very important thing that I shouldn't neglect, because it's basically highly relevant to me, is that one thing that Redux does not do and will never do is host other virtual instruments. And that's fundamental. If you use a tracker program in the traditional sense, like you just use it to mangle samples on a granular level and really using it as a sampler, then there is no real benefit to getting Renoise over Redux, apart from if you really love this idea of working in tracker, and you've discovered that it's extremely efficient, which it is. It's in the words of Matt Piersall himself, the tracker tracker interface. People who use trackers are the fastest. Do you remember he said that in a previous episode? Because just the approach is very different how you think about making music. Anyway, getting Renoise will allow you that. It'll also allow you to use VST instruments. So if you're an unusual odd person like me, so I don't use any samples in Renoise. I use it only for its efficiency, using it with virtual instruments. Then that is one reason not to get Redux, because Redux from the beginning was intended to be a sampler.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I would advise for all the people listening, probably if you are using Renoise, you've probably already gotten Redux, or you've decided that you don't need it because your main DAW is Renoise anyway. If you are not a Renoise user and you're considering it, I would advise not getting Renoise itself, but getting Redux, simply because you can make use of all of the key benefits of Renoise in the comfort and the familiarity of your own DAW.
Gotcha.
Huh. Okay.
Very cool. Thanks for the rundown, man.
So Matt's asking, it's an instrument plugin, not an audio plugin? That's correct.
So, like, it's not an EQ or a compressor or anything like that.
No, it's not an effect. It is a very heavily featured sampler with internal effects, phrase sequencing, which just happen to be in a tracker style, which give you all those benefits of efficiency, speed, and extremely granular control.
Nice.
I should write that blurb, shouldn't I? That was pretty good.
You should.
It's really good.
I don't know. I could do it a second time though. If you ask me to repeat
on
that.
tape.
Oh, well.
Yeah, so that's that.
So,
quick question.
You going to get Redux?
Well, I'm thinking about it. I was, from that last bit there, I was thinking, I do like the tracker interface. I have that tracker experience in me, and I was thinking, maybe I could use Redux. I know that I would love to use it with certain instruments. Oh wait, I can't do that. Okay, I gotcha. So that's making me think about that a little bit more. I am kind of interested in the sample editor. Is the sample editor in Redux pretty much the same as the sample editor in Renoise?
It's exactly the same.
Exactly.
You'll find it. It's one thing I should just warn you. It is not a sort of super heavy-duty industrial strength sample editor. It gives you the basics, but the good thing about it is just the way that it's laid out is just extremely fast. Mm-hmm. And because it's tied in directly with a sampler plugin, it's really easy to sort of, here's a long sample, just chop it up into these bits, create extra samples out of those bits, just do a quick tweak to all those extra samples, and then save them all out. It's really, really quick for doing things like that.
Yeah, that sounds cool. It feels like it's been a while since I've really had really used a nice, quick, lightweight sampler as a sampler. I mean, obviously I have Contact, but honestly, Contact is just this thing that I load instrument banks into, and I never actually touch the samples. Now, before Contact, I was messing around with other things, like I used to mess around with Mach 5, and I used it more like a sampler. And also another, if you're a tracker guy, you might remember a company called Maz Sound, and they made their own sampler called V-Sampler. And I also used that as a sampler, and I really liked the fast editing functionality that was in there. But since I haven't found a replacement for those, or rather Contact has sort of put me into this sort of sample editing malaise, maybe I should go back into that, because I really do enjoy having that, very fast, destructive sample editor for when I'm doing certain music where I want to have that sort of fine control over what's going on a sample level.
I think you are the perfect customer for this plugin, because I wouldn't, in that case, hearing that, I wouldn't recommend that you go with the full-blown Renoise DAW. I don't think it would give you as much benefit as being able to use Redux and the best of Renoise's sampling features within Sonar or within Reaper.
Okay. Okay, cool. And the price is definitely right.
Yeah.
I'm willing to jump in on that right now.
So Mr. Ostrich is asking, so is it similar to how Battery or Contact by Native Instruments works within a DAW? Yes. However, much, much faster. Yeah. Basically, it's just really, really fast, and everything. If you use it for, you give it a few days to get used to it, obviously. And being version 1.0, you may find a few little bits and pieces that need to be ironed out. I can tell you with confidence that, like I said before, the programmers at Renoise are excellent, and they make you come across software when you use a computer a lot sometimes that just sort of stands out above the rest as being completely reliable. That's been my experience on PC and on Mac for over, 8 or 9 years, using Renoise as a DAW pretty much every day for extremely intensive music down to very, very simple music. Just fast, reliable, solid. So Redux, I imagine, once they iron out a few bits and pieces. Like I said, it is functional. There are just a few features that you may be scratching your head wondering, why can't I assign multiple outs in Logic? It works fine in Live on the Mac. It's just Logic handles things a bit different. Anyway, yeah, I'd say, Vince, you should definitely get it. There is a demo, guys, so don't buy it without trying it. But
nice trial version.
Yeah. So there you have it. Oh, look at this. We have a new viewer in our chat room, Philip. Good to have you here, Philip.
Nice.
First time joining here live. And Chase is saying that we really need a tracker tutorial from the pros. Well, I don't really know any professional tracker users, except myself.
I just friended one.
Did you?
Chris Hulbeck, right?
Chris Hulsbeck. You know him?
Well, no, I friended him on Facebook as a complete stranger, and he friended me back. And I thought, thank you.
Well, he's a legend.
I know, and it's really cool to see what he's working on because he posts a lot to Facebook.
All right. Yeah. Anyway,
pretty sure he's going to be at E3.
Do what?
Yeah.
Pretty sure he's going to be at E3. You can't miss him because he's German and incredibly tall.
Is he really?
He absolutely stands out in the crowd. I think he's 6'6", maybe. I mean, he's a basketball player tall.
You know, little known fact, Hulsbeck means very tall in German.
Really?
Yeah.
I wonder if that's actually his real name. I wonder if it's like Ringo Starr.
Just like Diamante means everybody's going to die.
Oh, man. Maybe after a few more jokes, but let's not get to that.
So we have a second topic today, actually, which came up in the green room, which is very, very interesting. It's not directly related to game audio, however, it is very, very relevant for anyone out there who is doing audio freelance or working in a team where your music has to be kind of parsed by other people. And it's not only relevant to music, but basically all kinds of collaborative art design. But we're going to talk about the context with doing it with music today. Very, very interesting. I think this is going to get pretty deep. So, Carl, would you like to start us off with some background?
Well, I was doing a mix, and I got some feedback, and the feedback was that it was too glassy and shaky. And I had to figure out what that means. I figured glassy was high-end. What do you guys think glassy and shaky means?
I'd say shaky. Yeah, before we talk about that, I want to just sort of lay some context for this discussion because it is really interesting. It's basically psychoacoustic linguistics.
Yep.
And I can see that grin on Vince's face because he knows this is where we're at. Psychoacoustic linguistics, people. So basically, when I was in doing industrial design, one thing that my Japanese design mentor taught me, which has stayed with me, is that when people give you a comment about a piece of art, the words that they use are very, very rarely exactly what they mean. So part of the process of working collaboratively with other people is parsing what they say and working out what it is that they really want you to do. So if somebody says, this music's too fast, it may not necessarily mean they want you to slow it down. It may mean something like it has too much energy, or it feels very rushed, and they want something that feels a bit softer and a bit more compatible and less abrasive. So it's really interesting when I heard you say that you're the person who was giving you feedback described with these words glassy and
shaky.
Shaky. So I think part of the process of being a music producer or sound effects producer working with other people is that ability to try and take words like glassy and work out what it actually means. And I think the really skilled people can actually take that. Glassy, okay, that means probably this. Fix it doing something that the actual person who said that would have no idea that that's what it could actually have meant, and delivering it back to them. So, yeah, glassy and shaky?
Shaky.
Yeah. I think glassy, yeah, I can probably shaky. Maybe it has something to do with stereo separation.
That's exactly what it ended up being, yeah.
Yeah, maybe if something is sort of a bit phasey or a bit too wide and they want it more direct, then maybe that's...
Yep. It's exactly what it was. It ended up being too wide, and so therefore there were some very short staccato kind of sounds that were showing up on either side, alternating, and it felt like it was shaking. They weren't happening fast, but the fact that it was going back and forth was the hint that it was shaking.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to pull back the stereo separator I was using, which I should probably prepare by saying what that was. It's actually a free VST. I'll look it up while we talk. What do you guys think glassy is?
Man, glassy could be a bunch of things. Like my first impression is that it must be something to do with those higher frequencies, you know, sort of in that 5K on up range. But then there's a part of me that thinks, since you're talking about overall mix, it could be something related to reverb or something, you know, with I would actually be thinking about doing something like I wonder if I might need to engage a more aggressive high pass filter specifically on any reverb or any other effect that I might have up there.
That's a great one.
That's a great suggestion. Yeah, I was also just thinking, that perhaps if the reverb needs to be a bit more diffuse, or if the reverb has too much high frequency content, I guess that could be. Or if it's like a spring reverb. Mm-hmm. You know, we know you have your evil spring reverb tendencies, Carl. The other thing that I thought it could be is a lack of mid-range. Maybe sort of mid to upper mid-range, maybe.
So here's what I did. You want to know the answer?
Okay. Mm.
Well, first of all, this is what leads into what we're talking about. So I went searching on the web for terminologies, because I'm not smart and knew that was called a psychoacoustic term. I don't know what that is. Fancy word times 3. I'm not smart enough to know that stuff. So I went searching on the interwebs to give me a hint, and I found this, which I think is pretty cool. PodComplex frequency overview chart. And they have things like, it's reversed, bass boom, and it tells you where you're going to want to make your cuts at 100, 250 hertz, you know, to get rid of some of that bass. Or if you've got something that's doing a lot of muddy, if something's very muddy, which is very common terminology, check out your 600 to 1K range for fixes. And I thought, oh, this is great. But I would like to make a chart that's a little bit more like gamer-centric. But I thought, you know, the language really does cross over between pro audio and game audio. Things that are muddy are muddy in games and pro audio. Sibilance is definitely a problem in both. So maybe this chart's good enough. But I should add Glassy to it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what I did. And I'm taking a moment from Pensato's place, if anybody watches that. He has this questionnaire that he gives people that he's interviewing at the end. And one of the questions he often asks people is, what's on your stereo bus? And when I'm mixing, I have a set number of things that I put on my stereo bus. And one of them is I really love Moog stuff. You guys ever heard of Moog, M-A-A-G, EQ4?
Sure.
And they have... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Vince and I actually saw a second-hand Moog EQ4, the blue ones, when we were in Osaka, didn't we?
Yeah.
Looking lonely.
Nice. Well, they have this band pass, this high-pass band called Air on it. And I'm here to tell you, this is what this show's good for, that I actually, to my ear, found a free piece of software that does the same thing, and it's by Stephen Slate Digital, called Revival. I'll put the link in the show notes and here. And Revival has 2 knobs. One pumps up the bass, compresses, and does behind the scenes. There's a bunch of stuff going on, from compressions to gain limiting and all the kinds of stuff going on that bass knob. And they call the bass knob thickness. Be careful with that guy, because I just did a mix where it was too high and I had to pull it back and send a revision too. The other one is called Shimmer on there. That is a free plugin. Shimmer, to my ear, is as close as you're going to get to the Moog Air without buying the Moog Air. Huh. So definitely check out Slate Digital Revival. I'll put it in the chat right now. So what I did is I turned that guy up too high, and it overproduced the high end in that mix and made it sound really shimmery and very glassy. What I did to fix the problem is, first I pulled it back and I sent it off, and they said, "Nah, it's not really what it doesn't. It still sounds too glassy." So then I applied a tube after the shimmer and kind of crunched it up a little bit, and it set right in the mix where they wanted it. That's what I love about clients. Everybody listens to audio, whether they're just walking down the sidewalk hearing birds and car noises, whether they're an active listener of albums and CDs, or they're on their radio, they're listening in their car, whatever they are, everybody listens. And the feedback that you get from listeners is fantastic, because it's kind of raw and pure in its estimation. And I know that some audio guys kind of look at it as if, oh, what does he know? I'm the audio guy. I'll tell him what he likes, kind of that Steve Jobs kind of attitude. But the truth is, the feedback that I get from clients, even though I sometimes have trouble translating the words into what it means frequency-wise or production-wise, it's always spot on. And when I fix what it is that they don't like, I always like my mix better. I can't think of a time that I don't like my mix better after I've applied what they like. Very rarely do clients say, I want it to be really tight and full of mid-range and be very muddy. That doesn't happen. And yet I might accidentally do that when my ears get too tired. So I think it's really cool to think about what your clients are telling you back. Now, if we can translate that into our language, that's the real trick of our job. And that's what I did with Glassy, is I pulled back the shimmer on the Revival a little bit, and I put a tube after it so that it had, in a real tube, I didn't put a software tube. I actually ran it through some of my stuff here. And it sounded so much better. And it was just on a stereo bus. It was an easy fix, but perhaps, I guess I can't say perhaps, I actually thought at the beginning that it was going to be this long, drawn-out mix, that we were going to have some communication errors. I was going to have trouble finding out what all the instruments were. And so my brain said, why don't we just start with the easy stuff? Just start with the stereo bus and see if we can fix it from there. And if they still don't like it, because that's what revisions are all about, then we'll dig in deeper to each track and try to figure out where this problem is. But let's just start with the stereo bus. And it all paid off. I was pretty stoked. That's all I got to say.
Do you guys have any advice for working with clients who are in that mid-band of familiarity with audio production? Because I think when you work with people who are completely removed from audio production, to a certain extent it's actually easier, because they'll give you terms that can be interpreted fairly easily, like punchy or glassy or muddy or boomy, or those kinds of very subjective words. People who are extremely on the top end of familiarity with audio production will give you sort of more concrete advice that you can actually just follow. Because they know what they're talking about and they know what they're hearing. Yeah. But the mid-band, the mid area is where I imagine it's actually quite difficult, because people have a sort of a passing familiarity with how things work. They may not always be correct with what it is that that they're hearing or what it is that they're criticizing, but they may be using terminology that they've heard before, or they may, like, for example, can you make it sound wider? That if somebody says that, you kind of know that, oh, they're probably in that mid-band because they understand about stereo width enough to use the word wide to describe something that sounds narrower. But that may be a situation where that person uses the word wide without thinking that, oh, it's just a matter, you just go into your DAW or whatever you call it and you just pump up the wideness, don't you?
Actually, that was part two. Is I have to correct myself. When I sent back the tubed version of Shimmer, they liked it, but then they more identified that it was too much in the right and left, so I got a third feedback. And that was because I used this piece of software here called BX Solo, and it's got a knob on it, and it does widen just by changing the knob. Just boop, 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 it keeps moving it out. So I pulled it back one knob. They love the mix from then on out. So that's something that's in my stereo chain right there. Is I put Revival before the widener, and then I put the BX Solo. And then after that, I put Isotope. What's the Isotope, famous Isotope? They just came out. Ozone, yeah. But I use Ozone 5. I got to tell you the truth. I don't use that very often. It's always in my stereo chain, but it's always bypassed. I only use it if nothing else seems to be working and I'm like running out of time. And then I pop it in. I take out like BX, or I take out Revival, and then I go into Ozone and try to find some preset that gets me started and fix it from there. But I very rarely use Ozone, but it's always there because it's a dependable piece of software that you can always fall back on. And then after that, I put Magic AB in there because I'm always ABing another mix, so I can make sure that I'm hitting like the standard and the frequency width of professional guys who are much better at this than me. And then after that, I put Isotope Eyesight on there so I can see my meters, my stereo width, and make sure I'm hitting LUFS and all that other stuff. If anybody's curious.
What's on your two-bus, Vince? We have a great question from Chase in the chat room, but we'll just finish this two-bus subtopic here before we move on to this question, because it's a very good question. What's on your two-bus, Vince?
Very little. I remember going to, I can't remember who it was, but I remember talking to this one engineer, and he actually, I can't remember who it was, darn it, but he basically recommended that, always deal with everything on a piece-to-piece basis or an album-to-album basis. And, if you put stuff that just sort of sits there in a template, that could get you kind of complacent as to what exactly can be going on or what you eventually do with your mix. So keep it pretty bare in there. Right now, the only thing that I have there is my room correction in the form of that room correction software. But other than that, nothing else. If I want it to be a little wider, or if I want to add some of that little sheen or shimmer or anything else, I do have some plugins that I rely on for that stuff, but they are not there by default, not until pretty close to the very end of the production of a particular piece.
Well, that's a pretty boring answer, isn't it? Yeah, you're right, though. It is, because I'm sort of the same, too. It does depend on the project. Sorry, I shouldn't say boring. I should say non-geeky.
It's kind of like when we were talking about project templates before. If you put things on there, sometimes it can hide things away. It can actually keep. Oh, there's the dog. It can keep certain options from being part of your palette. By having this already prescribed palette. So final master stuff too. Not just individual note stuff or instrument stuff.
Yeah, you're right. I'd be the same, and I'm in that same boat as well. That my two bus changes depending on what I'm doing. My music I usually have mastered externally. I do that specifically to get second person's appraisal of what I'm doing, because it's too insular. Making music. It's all just you, and it's like sitting there like this. And the more you do it yourself, the kind of more the more correct things that are odd begin to sound. So it's great at the end of the process to sort of send it out to an external professional who will listen to it and say, Alex, this is absolute feces. Which tends to happen to me a fair amount, which means I go back and do it again. But that's a great sort of kind of a filter to make sure that I'm actually doing stuff that sounds good to other people too. Anyway.
What I like about having it, though, is I've standardized my output. Like, for instance, I'm doing some just 3 tracks for a soundtrack. And my first mix, because there's a keyboard part in there that's really spacey, the first mix kind of called for a little bit of a reverb to be added. And I noticed when I was doing my second mix that when I tried to match my first mix, it didn't work, because the second song is like a Southwest, it has a lot of similarities to the movie Serenity, that TV show. What was it called?
Firefly?
Firefly, right? So the soundtrack to Firefly, this soundtrack has some really similar kind of awesomeness to that same soundtrack. But, so it's kind of got that almost a country folk kind of Southwest kind of sound to it. So I've got 3 songs in there. One of them has this keyboard part that's really kind of spacey. And the next one is just pure, like mandolins, guitars. You can almost hear boots with spurs, stomping on the wooden floors of the bar. And then the third one has this real Southwest kind of trumpet happening at the beginning. And I realized that I'm doing 3 different mixes because of the way they sound. And it got me wondering, because I've never done a full soundtrack for a movie. Do you standardize so that all of the mixes across the whole thing sound exactly the same? Or do you fluctuate a little bit because the song kind of calls for it? When you guys are doing soundtracks for games that you work on, you take the game, you take all your audio, you pull it out, you decide you want to do an OST, you remix it for the OST. Do you set a standard so that they all have a very similar flow, or are they more disparate than that?
I think I'll probably just jump in there because it's not a soundtrack for a film, but I had to write 8 pieces of music for a game that we're doing at the Vitae Backroom at the moment for a VR game. And in this case, all of the 8 pieces of the music appear in the game on a radio that plays. So they need to have a very consistent sound.
Yeah.
But they're all sort of short pieces of music that just play one after the other in a random sequence, like on a radio. and so they all needed to sort of sound very, very similar. So I left making it sound like a radio, I left that to doing it in Wise. With the actual pieces of music themselves, I felt it really, really important to make sure that they sound consistent right from the mix stage. So doing that meant, basically I used Yuhi Saturn on the master bus, which is a tape simulator.
Saturn?
Sorry, not Saturn. Saturn. Sorry, I'm thinking of FabFilter Saturn. Saturn, as in S-A-T-I-N.
Oh, I wrote the planet Saturn.
That's FabFilter's saturation plugin is Saturn.
Gotcha.
But anyway, Yuhi Saturn is a tape, a saturating tape simulator. I also used the other things I use DMG Audio's eQuick, basically to try and get a sort of a similar sound, dropping out the that's just an EQ plugin, dropping out the stereo content in the low end to try and keep the bottom end as mono as possible. Also, I used Tone Booster's iSone. So this is it's a VR game. However, there is the chance that people may be listening to it on a stereo instead of through headphones, which would be very unlikely. But just in case, Tone Booster's iSone, if you didn't know about it, is a headphone simulator.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Monitoring simulator for headphones. It's very affordable. You should definitely check it out if you're interested. I don't recommend doing your music production on headphones in this situation because it's a VR game, and I know that 90% of the people who are going to be consuming this game and this music will be doing it through headphones. I did start out the whole process on headphones, but it just becomes very tiring on headphones.
Yeah.
But being able to check it, especially when I'm at the client's place, I don't have any monitors or anything. It's just me and my Audio Technica. So being able to check it on a headphone monitoring simulator, which simulates room acoustics and crosstalk and stuff like that, is very handy. And then finally, Klanghelm VUMT, which is a VU meter.
Yeah.
Just old-fashioned VU meter, which I really love just for making sure, just sort of checking dynamic range I find very easy to do on a needle. And also for just making sure things that are at a consistent level to send to the mastering engineer.
I use Doro for that.
Oh, the Waves one, yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
The one thing about VU meters is you need to be careful that they're very sensitive to low-end frequency. So if you've got a very, very bassy mix, then it will be pushing that needle a lot more than something that's very trebly, even though they could actually be at the same kind of RMS level. So you do sort of need to be a bit cautious that way.
Yeah, Waves does make one, but I use the hardware version. I love it, though.
I just really like needles. And I realized the other day when I was looking at them that even though they're sort of, pretentious audio hipster, look at me and my vintage emulations, they're actually, from a UI point of view, they're very, very practical because the point that moves that you're actually looking at has this big kind of excursion at the top. So you can really, in a small space, you can sort of see very, very clearly, the small degrees of movement in something. And when it's a VU meter that's got that sort of, that predictable fallback, what is it, 300 milliseconds integration or whatever, I don't know the technical terms. But,
you said it.
That's just sort of, it's just very, it misses the peaks in your music, which of course is not so useful on some occasions, but because of that, it just sort of gives you a nice, sort of average kind of level if you are used to reading them. You're going to say something?
I have a T-shirt that does it.
A T-shirt? I
do. It's a T-shirt that has little VU meters on it, and it just lights up as people are talking about it.
That's, yes. Now we should probably just get... Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead with your true story. We've got to get to Chase this excellent question.
I will. Eddie Van Halen kept slapping when he figured out where the speaker was for my T-shirt. Every time he'd pass me, we were working with him on Guitar Hero, he would slap my speaker and it would just bounce up, and he thought that was funny as hell. That is a true story. Take it to the grave.
Oh, Kyle, stop dropping names.
I loved it. It was one of my favorite things working with him. He was so cool.
Well, for those who don't know, Kyle Johnson is actually extremely famous. He's actually
worked with... Yes, that's it. Everybody knows that. I've been writing that on bathroom walls for years. It should pay off by now.
He's been... You've worked with who? Let's see. Alice Cooper, Eddie Van Halen, Stevie Wonder.
Yeah.
Did he work with Alice Cooper?
No. But that'd be cool. No, but there's a studio here in town, and they have a Neve 8108, and a lot of Alice Cooper records were recorded on that Neve.
Well, that's
might
close
be
enough.
what we were talking about.
Now, let's get to Chase's excellent question. This is a really great question.
I'm rolling up in the chat. You read it. You have that fancy voice.
Fancy voice. What do you think about that, Vince? Is my voice fancy?
I think it's pretty good. Pretty good.
All right. So, Chase. Actually, I can read it like Chase does, because as people know who have met Chase, the mighty Chase Bethia, the more that I talk to him, the more that he sounds British. The more that Kyle talks to him, the more that he sounds American. He's great. Anyway, so Chase says, in this accent, because I'm reading it, he says, ironically, I just received a comment from a client who said he said that I was recording for realism too seriously and that people aren't going to be paying too close attention to the drop sound effects and what surface it is dropped on. What would you guys say to that client? So basically, Chase's client is saying that, Chase, you're doing far too good a job.
Yeah.
Make it more shit.
Well, that's like saying, the first thing that came to mind when I read that is, when you do footsteps in the games, you always have the material that the footstep is on. Footstep on stone, footstep on grass. Can you imagine just putting one footstep like on a steel sheet and the guy goes running through the forest? That'd be terrible. I mean, of course Chase should be paying attention to the surface that it has been dropped on, but I'm not the client.
Right.
I'm just sort of wondering, along that line of thought that along that line of thought that what a client says is not always exactly what they want you to do. I'm wondering whether, just to speaking directly to Chase, in this situation, I wonder whether there was actually something else that they were trying to hint at, like, you're too slow. Not that Chase is slow, and I know that Chase works with the speed of a Shinkansen bullet train.
A gazelle.
He's out, he's in there, he's fast.
Yeah,
anyway,
it's unbelievable.
But I'm just wondering whether maybe they were trying to hint at something, like, maybe they wanted Chase to spend more time on another aspect of the sound project, or basically whether it actually was that they were concerned that, he's putting all this effort into making detailed multiple surface sound effects when the client actually wanted him to be doing more of that fantastic Chase Bethia music.
What do you think, Vince? As an audio director, what would you tell somebody under you to go do if the client came back and said that?
Well, it depends a lot on the game design. What is the game functionality? What does the player actually need at that point? Is the surface material actually a really important thing? You mentioned the footsteps, and footsteps in video games actually really runs the gamut. There are places where you do want individual footsteps, and it's really important where you're stepping, like a platformer game where it's a third-person camera. And then there are games where having footsteps is really a whole lot less important. For example, in a first-person game where you're not really expected to actually see specifically where your footsteps are while you're running and shooting. I would just ask, my first question would be, does the player need to know what the surface material is? Okay. Does he need to know that? Does the player need to know specifically what the item is that is being dropped on the floor? Is that important? And it's all these details sort of run a particular gradient of how much stuff is really being communicated to the player. If the communication is important, absolutely, you should try to do your best to actually make that oral communication happen, because that's how you explore what is the possibility for what the game can be. But otherwise, either because of design time limitation or the game is in a particular state, and no, this is not what the game is about. The player doesn't need to know this information. It actually somehow decreases the immersion because it gets players thinking about this thing, which is actually not part of the system or the core loop that we want the player to be involved in. So I would always get it back into what does the game really, really want, because there is what the client wants, but what the game wants is also a really important thing, and sometimes it's useful. as an audio guy to say, well, I'm listening to the game, and this is what I'm seeing from the game design, and sometimes even game producers and game designers. They might not necessarily understand that that's what the game is saying and what you're hearing. So thinking about the game, I think, is that thing that I always say, and I think is you can't listen to the game enough, no matter what job you have in game development.
Sounds as if, looking at Chase's response, the player needs to know about the surface because it's a first-person exploration game, and the game doesn't show much light. So it sounds as if your colleague is just wrong.
Well, the colleague is never wrong, but you got to try to manipulate. You got to try to massage them. That was not a Freudian slip. You have to try to massage them into the direction of understanding why it's important to the game, just like Vince said.
Yeah.
Maybe do a cut scene the way they like it, take a little snapshot of the game with the way they like it and the way you suggested. I know that takes some time, but taking the time to visually kind of, it's funny, taking the time to visually show what something sounds like, because we're talking games, and games are very visual and auditory. It pays off a lot in the end, and it builds a trust that you never want to shake that trust, you know.
Yeah, appeasing your client is definitely important, but also going a little bit beyond, maybe putting in a little bit of work and showing this is what it could be. You know, that's always a really nice thing. All clients will appreciate it if you show, okay, I'm delivering this, but I'm also showing a little bit more. Here's a further possibility. Maybe you didn't quite anticipate this.
Yeah, and clients want you to be serious about the games you work on. I know that I try to keep being independent, we try to keep a lot of clients at the same time because, you know, it's feast or famine for independent people. And so typically I find myself working at a kind of deficit where I have more to do than I have time to do. And I don't give it any less attention. I still give it 110% everything that I have to work on. But the biggest thing that I want to do is let the person know that their game matters to me, and I really want to give it that 110%. And so if you can take the time to do some sort of like A/B video of what they're asking for and what you think is the best thing, it'll pay dividends at the end because they'll see that you care enough to take that time and that you're investing yourself into the audio of their game. I think that's really important.
It seems really strange to me, Chase, that that a colleague who's working on this game, the same game with you, would comment that you are putting in too much detail, or it's like basically you're doing too good a job and you can strip it back. It sort of, that's why I guess when I read that comment, it sort of made me think that maybe it has something to do with something beyond just that particular sound effect and the application in the game. Maybe it is something that it's with scheduling and efficiency and workflow, which of course is not really what you want to hear when you're putting in that degree of effort into it, but maybe that's a possibility.
Yeah. Besides scheduling and speed, maybe the producer knows something that you're not quite privy to. Like maybe there's a prioritization because designers are working on something else and they have particular sound needs that need to be filled, but that hasn't been yet communicated. You know, it might be worthwhile saying, okay, I'm putting in all this effort on this because I think that this is important right now. But if there's something else that's going on right now, I would love to know. A lot of these games, as audio guys, we're not getting the game when it's 100% locked down. If it's 50% locked down and designers are exploring something else, maybe engage in a little conversation, and he might reveal that, well, actually designers are working on X, Y, and Z now, and it might be actually really useful to help them out because some sounds could help them explore that particular design a little bit further, a little bit faster.
That is an excellent suggestion.
Yep. So until you're independently wealthy, do what they say. That's not what I said. I don't know what that was. I'm kidding. There was another thing I wanted to talk about, and I lost my mind about it. I've forgotten.
Maybe we can go back to something that Alex was saying about, because he was talking about the midband. How do you communicate with people who have a bit of audio knowledge and and you're not sure exactly how to respond to that.
Because those people would be confused and possibly a bit frustrated or irritated if you don't do exactly what they're asking for, because they, like, make it wider. Why don't you just make it wider? I just want it wider. It's just a plugin. Put it in one of your fancy plugins to make it wider.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you deal with in those situations, guys? What experiences have you had with those kinds of that band of familiarity?
Well, with those things, I think it would be useful to actually just go ahead and do that. Especially if they are asking for something where the fix is potentially a simple fix. You can go ahead and give them the simple fix. Okay, I'm going to put in one of these mid-side processors and make it wider, and I'll throw it at you, because if we actually treat it in that way, that is a faster than real-time fix. Okay, throw in the plugin, 50% wider, render, email. I can do that faster than real time, and just do that. But of course, always couch that in. This is the process that I'm going through. The guys that I think that are in that midband of audio is all of these little easy things that directly translate into these particular effects that we want to have. They're not necessarily privy to your particular workflow and the palette that you're actually exercising when creating a particular piece of music or a particular sound effect. They might actually really appreciate if they are in that midband where they enjoy looking at, they enjoy educating themselves further on more audio. They might appreciate the fact that, this guy is talking about, I need to do this particular different mix here, and I'm going to actually deal with actually rearranging for this particular instrument now, and here are all the individual things that I have to do. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. More education, more communicating more knowledge is always a good thing, I think.
Also, Magic AB, like I was talking about, that I put in my stereo bus. I rip from games that I know that the client wants to sound similar to. I want the soundtrack to sound like Diablo 3, so I'll rip a song out of Diablo 3 and I'll throw it into Magic AB, and I'll constantly go back and forth and listen to that mix and compare mine to that so that I can hit their marks. I think that's really important.
Magic AB is really fantastic, isn't it? It's like such a little simple thing that you can do it yourself. We just have an extra track there with your reference on it, but it just makes it so easier to switch between them, especially for levels and for mix. I just realized that we've been talking about the feedback from clients as it relates to mixing, but we haven't actually touched on this kind of feedback from clients as it relates to composition and music, because that's when it gets even more difficult. When somebody says to you, make it more lively, or make it, make the melody sing more, or, that's the really tricky part. Because as Vince said, when somebody gives you that kind of comment, it's too glassy, or make it wider, or could you please put in a notch at 600 hertz, or whatever. Those three levels of experience, that's pretty easy from a mixing point of view, because you just tweak stuff and then send it again. However, when it comes to the music, you like notches at 600 hertz, Carl?
Yeah, that cracked me up. I love hearing that. Don't you wish every client said that?
Yeah, that's right. Just drop in a notch there at 600 and you'd be good.
All right. Fine.
Okay. Fine.
That guy knows what he wants.
Anyway, when it comes to music, now that's like really subjective now.
Well, when sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I used to be a programmer, and before I got into game audio, and I used to do a lot of website stuff. And when I would meet with a client, I would take colored pencils with me, and they would start talking, and then I would start drawing out the interface and using colored pencils to draw on the colors of what I thought they were saying. Like if they would say something like, and we've talked about this before, it needs to be really, really rich, and I know that means reds and golds and stuff, or let's keep it very subtle. Those are soft blues or some browns or something. There's something in your brain that you translate these adjectives into that relate to colors. And I do the same thing now when I don't do as much composing as I used to do. When I got into games, it was all composition. Then it went sound design. Now it's kind of sound design and mixing. But back in the day when I did a lot of composing, it was I would try to translate those descriptors into colors, and then colors also relate to music. And there's some descriptors that don't relate to colors, like you were saying something needs to be, what did you say, it needs to be more active or something? That to me means lively. That to me means you have to include a lot of short notes, not staccatos, but the tempo needs to pick up, and you need to have some sort of like, short notes in there, like a rig or a reel or something, a jig or a reel. Sorry, that's what that means to me, and I think it's important that as musicians we don't lose our kind of ethereal way of thinking. We don't want to become corporate and closed off and fundamental necessarily. This is my opinion only. We want to keep that kind of ethereal way of thinking, but we also have to be able to translate from corporate to ethereal, because the person speaking to us are not necessarily as out in the ether as we are, and we have to find a relationship. So back in programming days when I was doing web, it was colors that related to adjectives to color kind of dictionary I had, and now it's an adjective to color to music kind of dictionary that I use. Do you guys do the same thing?
Well, I mean, sometimes early on I'll actually have a little bit of vocabulary that I'll sort of look back on, what designers' requests, what level designers are asking for, what character designers are asking for, and I'll look back on that, and I'll keep that in mind even 2 years, 3 years into the future, even as things change. Those things can actually be really useful. I'm not sure about like a full-on music Bible. I know some music composers like to actually have music Bible. Here are particular leitmotifs. Here are particular harmonic structures, and those are cool too. I can totally see that if you want to, if you're willing to establish, instantiate something really solid right there. But I don't know. I like keeping things a little bit free flowing, I guess, while still having some anchor points.
Yeah. I was going to ask. I didn't want to interrupt Alex, so sorry about the lag there. I was going to ask though. Do you use theory for those moments? Do you keep it kind of free flowing, and then when things get, the description from the director says your free flow is good but not perfect, do you start to apply some sort of theory to that so that you can kind of fall into these standards that you expect that he's used to hearing?
Not really. I like to, there are going to be different things that they want, like, oh, it's got to sound ethereal, or it's got to sound particularly homey or closed in, and there's just so many different ways that you can do that. You can have something that's very active sound sort of homey, and you could have something that is sort of stodgy. You just do a slight adjustment to something that was originally stodgy, and it can sound solemn and become almost holy in that moment. There's just so many possibilities that I actually like having the anchor points be things that are non-musical, not specific musical techniques, not a specific musical palette, but rather a palette of particular emotions or desires on the part of the game designers.
Well, this has been a really, really interesting episode, hasn't it?
Yeah, I want to keep that going next week.
Yeah, next week it's E3 week.
Already?
Yeah, that's right, it is.
Oh, man.
All right.
So next week is the pre-E3 show, I guess.
Are we pre-3ing?
Pre-3.
I wonder if I might even actually be together with you, Kyle. I think that's how it's going to work. It's Monday night over there, isn't it, at the moment?
It is Monday night. We are not in the future. We are in the past.
If I don't have plans, then actually, wow, wouldn't that be exciting?
Yes, and we have a map of places to take you so that you don't get the typical LA tourist kind of crap.
Was that South Compton? No, South Central?
We're going to drop you off in the middle of Compton and say, sign up.
It's like 300, the Spartans kicking their babies down the cliff. Let's see who survives.
Jeez.
I remember a movie back in the day that had Jeremy Piven in it. It was a bunch of friends that went out on a bus, and they got lost. They got lost in L.A. somewhere. It was a nightmare of them trying to get home.
Wow, that's a really bad echo all of a sudden.
I know. So anyway.
I think I'm all right, but
I'm going to hang up. I say we call it a show.
Yeah, that was a good show.
It was fun, man. Well, Chatties, thanks for joining us. It was a lively chat with so many people, including Absolute, which just cracks me up. And good to see Chris Trevino back and Dan Young. I know him. Thanks, guys, for joining in. Thanks for always being part of the show. If you're on Twitter, tweet us. If you're on Facebook, spread us. If you're on YouTube, love us. Something like that.
Close enough.
And we'll see you guys next week.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Stopping. Stop. It won't stop.